Now that we finally wrapped up each and every division, recapping what our record predictions are, we are going to be talking about different position groups and who we think are the best at their positions. So, starting today is very fantasy friendly. We've got some quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers we want to get into. So, check out our top five, where we think we are different at, who do we have at number one in each spot, and let's roll the intro.
Welcome back, guys. Episode 20. Hard to believe we're there. We reached 20 straight weeks of doing the podcast, so quite a milestone. I've enjoyed the ride since we started in March, and um, right now we finished all of our divisions. So Corsian and I thought it would be a good idea to go to the position groups. On defense, there's a little bit of some interesting things we're going to plan for later with how the edge positions defined and secondary and stuff like that. But we thought it'd be a good idea post the Hall of Fame game and as we get preseason insights to talk about who are our top five um, position group, like players within the position groups itself. So today we got quarterback, we got wide receiver, and we got running back in between them. So, of course, Sam, without further ado, when you think about the quarterbacks in the league, what are you looking for and how are you defining like your top
Mhm. I think winning is a big part of it. I know, obviously it is a team game in the end, but I think throughout, all of football history, a good quarterback is kind of what leads you to championships. We've seen, everyone knows the Hall of Fame names: Joe Montana, Steve Young, John Elway, Troy Aikman. Those are the names attached to those winning franchises. And I think for my rankings, that's a big part of it. Is can these players, you know, make it deep into the playoffs? Can they lead a successful team? But initially, I know there's the Terry Bradshaws in the of the Hall of Fame, and so putting up those good numbers, whether it be pass yards, uh, you know, if it, good scrambling ability, good pocket presence, all those kind of things uh, matters. Well, I mean, I feel like it's kind of a standard, I guess, metric of quarterback play is, do they actually quarterback good, or are they just carried by the rest of the team?
Yeah, and I like the last part you mentioned because a lot of times you'll see quarterback play in leaps and bounds. Like think about Jalen Hurts, for example. If we look at our top five, like he's both in our top five based off this previous season. And there's a lot of stuff within the quarterback's control and what he can do, and there's a lot like that doesn't get talked about on the surrounding cast on like how that can impact the quarterback play itself. So I agree with you. Winning is a big part of it. There's a reason Tom Brady's the goat. Um,
Hmm.
but if you look at the coaching, the general management, and like how they surround their quarterback play, I think that's also a huge factor into helping the process of a quarterback's growth. So without
Hmm.
further ado, we'll get into who's number five for you.
Yes, number 5 on my list was Trevor Lawrence, quarterback for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Um, I think I had a decently hard time figuring out who to put at my number 5 spot. For 1 through 4 is pretty easy, but I feel like there was a lot of guys here that I thought were really similar in tier in terms of, you know, I guess who I would like to have leading my franchise. And I don't want to, put spoilers ahead of who my top 4 guys are, but I just want to kind of quickly go over some of, I guess, the stats that I saw for him this last season. He broke out, had a 4,000-yard passing season, didn't really turn the ball over, and he had a middle of the packish, touchdown type season with 25. But I think about how I guess the Jaguars kind of started off a bit shaky at the start of the season, but towards the end they really kicked it into high gear, and I think that um, his efficiency will just continue to go up from here. And so that's why I kind of put him at my number 5 spot over maybe a few other guys that just fall short of this list that I got for, my top 5 quarterback. But this plus, I think that additionally, I do think that his talent was not the most elite when you look at the other top 5 quarterbacks that I got here as well. And so I think with the addition of Calvin Ridley and better chemistry with the rest of his guys, like I said, he just continues to play better football. But that's my number 5 guy.
Yeah, if you haven't seen our AFC South preview episode, I was really high on the Jaguars. I think Trevor Lawrence is primed for a big leap this year. I think Christian Kirk has done a lot of positive things that people have docked him about when he got his contract, but he's proven them wrong. And I think with the addition of Calvin Ridley and the growth of Evan Ingram and how they're building that offense, I'm not surprised you have him top five. I didn't have him in my top five, but Trevor Lawrence is steadily approaching and rapidly rising. So I did not blame you for having him at five. Um, I found this an interesting stat about who I have at five that you would not guess who it would be. So this quarterback, he earned the best rate among full-time starters at attempting hitch routes, where he had a positive grade of like almost 40%, 39.4% of his attempts were successfully completed on hitch routes. And he attempted 107 of them and completed 89 of them. So like the grade and the completion are kind of different, but like he had 904 yards strictly on hitch routes. But if I tell you the name of this quarterback, you would not associate it with it, and that is Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert stood out like from his rookie year for his deep ball ability and his cannon of an arm. And I think the way last season ended up was not like the best part, but it wasn't indicative of what he can do. I think another stat I think that's telling on what his capabilities are is the corner route because over the course of this entire season, he only attempted 14 corner routes and he completed 9 of them. But he had the best stats from that. He had 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, and his average depth of target was 27.2. So I look at these stats and I'm saying, okay, he didn't have any turnover worthy plays. He leads the league in yards per attempt at that route. And then for the passer rating and completion percentage, like they're both the highest in the league at that type of route. So what I'm saying is like he can attempt more than just the deep ball. Like when you think about go routes and 9 routes, he can attempt the corner routes itself. And when I think about his highest of highs, I have to go back to the week 18, 21 NFL season, where on fourth down against the Raiders, even though they lost that game in OT, he put everything in his control to put that team in position to win. On fourth down, he had 6 tries, 6 attempts on fourth down to keep his team in the game. And he completed all 6 of them for 106 yards and a touchdown. And his passer rating was obviously a perfect 158.3. So even though he hasn't had the postseason success, I think there's a lot of things out of his control where I feel like if the offense just built around it, and I think Kellen Moore will do that, I think you see him surging to the top five.
Yeah, I think Justin Herbert, he's great quarterback. I think he fits perfectly, in this range. I don't think he is the best quarterback in the league by any means, but like I think him and Trevor Lawrence are really similar quarterbacks in terms of just they're phenomenal players, they're phenomenal quarterbacks. Um, yeah, and I think upcoming season for both these guys are going to be really exciting to watch, just in terms of what they can do with just with Justin Herbert, new offensive coordinator, and then with Trevor Lawrence, just a continually revamped offense that's continuing to gel together. But so just moving on, I guess, with my quarterback rankings for the number 4 spot, I put in Josh Allen from the Buffalo Bills. um, like I don't know, I feel like a lot of people might disagree with this, just because I don't know. I feel like everybody talks about like him or Mahomes in a lot of times, and I think at least in a fantasy perspective, a lot of like I probably would have him and maybe Jalen Hurts as my top 2 quarterbacks, just I guess with their passing and rushing upside. But in terms of just overall quarterback play, I think it's kind of weird saying that number 4 is a bad spot to be in, but I think that he does fall under this spot. And what I think this comes down to is just, I guess, some inconsistency that he's had, where like his highs when he plays football might be some of the best football we will see, but then there will be games where it's just like the team isn't kind of just meshed together. And I mean, it's not all on him, but I feel like even comparatively to Trevor Lawrence, I feel like he has more bad games than he does. But the reason I put him above Trevor Lawrence is just the fact that, we've seen him play good football for a couple years now. And, when he's playing good football, he's quite literally impossible to stop, which is a pretty crazy type of athlete to have. And I mean, you just look at the overall stats he has, just like Lawrence, he's over 4,000 pass yards on the season. And, um, he threw for 35 passing touchdowns. Granted, he did have 14 picks, but I think that's kind of just how the Bills' offense was built in terms of just, you know, crazy playmaking ability. And so when you kind of gamble on those crazy plays, it does ramp up some of those turnovers. But I mean, it pays off when you're in the playoffs. You're considered one of the best teams in the league. I think we've talked about how it's literally been, Bills and Chiefs as the top two heavy hitters, I guess, in the AFC until the emergence of a few other teams. But that's kind of how I had it in my head.
Yeah, I also have Josh Allen at number 4. Just to add on to what you're saying, I think the inconsistencies were specifically against the blitz. Because if you noticed, if you looked at his passing grades against the blitz, they were nearly 30 points lower if you're looking at PFF stats compared to when he wasn't blitz. And his grade against the blitz, like compared to other quarterbacks, like 26th. So it's pretty consistent from how he's developed in his career. When he's such an aggressive quarterback, he can beat you deep on like almost any play. And you look at his completion percentages and his yards per attempt on those plays, like um, they suggest like he's great at being aggressive, but if you can catch him on a blitz, that's when he's not as effective. But the reason why teams don't blitz on him so much is because of his scrambling ability. Because if he knows the blitz is coming, he can kind of create a scramble like
Mm-hmm.
route in his head. So like he knows where to go. So I think the most effective that teams felt last year is the blitz in like crucial spots, but like spots where it's not like easily like it's not an easy tell. So
Mm-hmm.
I think if Allen can overcome that, he would go back to my top 3 because that
Mm-hmm.
offense would be a lot more efficient, less turnovers, less punts, and I think that would help him greatly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, I feel like it feels like we're almost knocking Josh Allen, but it's just because I feel like he could eat like there is the argument that he could be like the number one quarterback in the league, but it feels almost weird having him at the number 4 spot and not being like a top 2, which I think maybe if you asked last year, he'd probably be in that discussion of is he 1 or is he 2? But I guess going into our third number 3's on the list. My number 3 quarterback was quarterback Jalen Hurts from the Philadelphia Eagles. And I know we had slightly differing opinions on this. I mean, overall, I know you still think that he's good, but and I think you have him higher than me. But anyways, going with Jalen Hurts, he had a huge step up this last season, which I was betting on. I drafted him in fantasy last year and panned out for me pretty nicely. But he had a huge step up last year, and while he wasn't like the league passing leader by any means, his rushing ability was um, pretty unbelievably good. It's kind of like that whole Josh Allen effect of um, they just have elite rushing upside that makes them really hard to stop. And I think that I guess one knock with Jalen Hurts was sometimes he maybe held on the ball too long, or he would try to do a little too much on certain times. I mean, we kind of see that with the amount of times he was sacked last season, I believe. Uh, yeah, he was sacked 38 times last year, which I mean, Allen was sacked decent, but I mean, there's it's like with a rushing quarterback, you'd kind of like to see that a little bit less. And so I think the fact that those sacks can be drive killers kind of put me a little bit down on him rather than having him maybe like the number 1 or the number 2 spot for me. But I think, yeah, just his continual development, and then I'm assuming that he'll probably continue to get better. I wouldn't be surprised if, he tries to get 4,000 pass yards this upcoming season. And I think if he's consistently putting up that 4K plus continuing his rushing upside, it's easier to put him maybe at that number 1 or 2 spot. But until then, I think having him at this number 3 is a good spot for him.
Yeah, and at this stage, it's kind of like you're you're like picking hairs, like because
Mhm.
all these quarterbacks are so close. But I think if it were not for that fumble in the Super Bowl,
Mhm.
like people would put him like top two or like
Mhm.
maybe even the best if
Mhm.
people were daring because
Mhm.
he had a phenomenal Super Bowl, to be
Mhm.
honest. That's why I have him higher than this current ranking,
Mhm.
but um, it's nothing against Joe Burrow, why he's not as high as Jalen Hurts. But I think just the scrambling ability you mentioned of Jalen Hurts has me
Mhm.
a little bit higher than Joe Burrow. Whereas I have Burrow over Allen because unlike Allen, I think a lot of Joe Burrow's interceptions have been not his fault. Like in fact, like
Mhm.
12 of his 35 career interceptions were tracked, not being
Mhm.
solely his fault. Like it could be a wide receiver miscommunication or like pressure from the O line. He's been dealing with a lot of pressure since his rookie year. It's
Mhm.
gotten better, and they've done good to address that. Even last season, if you look at his clean pocket passing grade, it's 93.5, which is the
Mhm.
best in the NFL, including the playoffs. So if you can protect this dude, he's the best. He's the best inside the pocket throwing. I think
Mhm.
he's even better than Patrick Mahomes inside the pocket, even though Mahomes has made great strides in that. In fact, like if you look at how long Jamar Chase has been in the NFL, like Joe Burrow's like passing grade um, has been like consistent. So it's not been
Mhm.
because of Jamar Chase. It's because of the clean pocket aspect of it.
Mhm.
And unlike Allen, I think his turnover worthy plays have been far fewer.
Mhm.
He's had 1.1% turnover worthy plays from a clean pocket while having like enough time to throw is 2.21. So like with that, it's the third fewest, and his ability to diagnose coverages and get the ball out shows like even if the offensive line is not perfect, he can still make plays happen without having the scrambling ability that Allen and Hurts have. So I
Mhm.
think putting him in between Allen and Hurts is reasonable in my opinion.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean Joe Burrow is fantastic. He's only shown that he's a good quarterback in the league, which is pretty tremendous. Even his rookie season that he got hurt, like he was lighting things up. He's able to sing. He literally looked like a veteran his rookie year, which is quite legendary. But yeah, so I guess that kind of just leads me into my number two pick. But I had Joe Burrow as the number two quarterback in the NFL, and I think it's like it feels weird to say, but like I like his consistency despite him only being in the league for 3 years. But it's kind of falls. It's almost the same with all these other quarterbacks that like I mean I think Josh Allen's like the oldest quarterback on at least that we've talked about so far, and he's like what 26 years old, I think, and it's like all of our top quarterbacks, at least all of all of our top quarterbacks are pretty young
Under
guys that
26.
yeah, and it's like we say consistency, but it's like they've all literally been consistently good for a couple years, despite how short the careers have already been, and I just think that Joe Burrow has I guess shown time and time again that he is a great quarterback, and I think that's kind of or over multiple years, and I think that's what it put me or had me put him over Jalen Hurts, at least in this year's ranking, just because I've seen Joe Burrow play good football quite literally his entire career, whereas Jalen Hurts had his breakout year last year, and I mean I think that like per this list, I think he'll continue this breakout and be a great quarterback for the next couple of, or maybe decade, but I just am more, I guess, trusting of the fact that I've seen more of good football from Joe Burrow, and that kind of leads me to believe that he's going to be um, the number two quarterback to have. And I mean, I'm just looking at his stats, right, and like his stats are quite literally the same the last two seasons where he's putting up 30 plus touchdowns over like just around 4,500 pass yards, and I mean he's around the same interceptions, about 12, 14, but like in my head, like this type of I guess passing volume and consistency, despite it being only for 2.5 years, it's like almost reminiscent of how I think of Drew Brees in terms of just insane volume and uh insane like I guess efficiency in terms of passing the football. And if he continues this, he's honestly going to have a Drew Brees type career, I think, in terms of just
I love that
career
comparison
accolades.
so much. I look at I look at Joe Burrow and like the amount of passing volume he has, and I definitely see that now that you mention it because both Drew Brees and Joe Burrow had like elite decision making.
Hmm.
Joe Burrow has it, but
Hmm.
I don't blame you because when I looked at Jalen Hurts' stats and picked him as number two, I just saw the drastic improvement from
Hmm.
like where he started out as 2020 to 2021 to 2022. Because if you look at his overall grades, forget like just passing and rushing, like they were like horrendous in 2020. They were like 56, I think, across the board per PFF. And then 2021, like he had an overall grade of 77, but his passing grade was 69 and his rushing grade was 86. But in 2022, his overall grade was 88.2, where his passing grade was 83 and his rushing grade was 83.8. It happened to be the same.
Hmm.
So I look at that and then I look at the fact that his turnover worthy play rate dropped from 3% to 1.9. And granted, I mentioned Joe Burrows was at 1.1 last year, which to your point is probably a good reason why you have a number two and I have a number
Hmm.
three. But we're right there, and I think it's a perfect example of what you want to see in a modern day QB, like who's developing into a passer. Like as a Bears fan, I only hope Justin Fields can follow this model. Um,
Hmm.
but I just look at his rushing yards and the amount of scores he had in the Super Bowl. They're both records for a quarterback. 45 of them came after contact. So it's not like Josh Allen's not the only quarterback that can just bulldoze through people and
Hmm.
then still keep running. Like Jalen Hurts is capable of doing that. And
Hmm.
he actually, what I found interesting is the amount of clean pockets that he's had and like the big time throws he had from that was actually tied with Patrick Mahomes. Both Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts had 22 big time throws from a clean pocket last year, which I found insanely interesting. So I'm looking at the Eagles' offensive line, and I'm looking at how much they're adding to the receiving talent, and I'm saying even if he just repeats what he did last year, sans one negative play, I think they can win the Super Bowl.
Hmm.
So um, I don't think the amount of big plays on the ground like gives him credit for how well he's ascended as a passer, but I only think he's going to get better from here as a passer.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, we both have these two players in the top three quarterbacks in the league. And obviously they're quite all literally interchangeable. I mean, even going into our top five, probably our top six, seven could be pretty interchangeable in terms of, quarterback preference. But obviously it's the big reveal moment for who our number one quarterbacks are. Obviously, mine is Davis Mills, quarterback for the Houston Texans. He's a
uh, don't do him dirty like that, man.
No. Davis Mills wasn't on my number one spot, unfortunately, despite having the best neck in the league. But um, in all reality, my best quarterback, and I'm sure your best quarterback was Patrick Mahomes. um, Whether or not you think that maybe on a year-to-year basis he's the best quarterback in the league, I think just like in the grand scheme of things, he is the best quarterback in the league right now, and I feel like you don't even need to pull up like the stats to necessarily back it up. It's like I mean his stats speak for themselves. He's incredibly efficient. He's a high volume passer. I mean, it's like I don't think there's any team that wishes they had their own quarterback over Patrick Mahomes, despite how great your quarterback might be. And like because you look at last season too. It's like people said that without Tyreek Hill, the Chiefs probably will struggle, especially with just the lack of I guess other supporting receiving talent outside of Kelsey. But you see Mahomes just does it again. Like nothing gets in his way. And I mean you even see Tyreek Hill had a great season last year too without Mahomes, and you're just like maybe the loss of that production affects Mahomes' skill this year. But no, like I said, he just played phenomenal. He's great passer. He's a great scrambler, and he knows how to make smart decisions. And I mean, he has a great coach too that helps elevate his play level. And I think that again, a lot of these other quarterbacks have great coaching, and that's what adds to their overall skill level and their skill ceiling, I guess is what I meant to say there. But look at that. You look at his pass rating, which is 105, which I think is the highest in the league. I guess it was tied with Tua Tagovailoa. Maybe he should have been the number 2 guy. I'm just kidding. But
Yeah. No, you
yeah.
said a lot of great stuff there, man.
Hmm.
Especially the scrambling ability. I know I threw a lot of great stats out for these past quarterbacks, but I think the story from the Super Bowl, I think a lot of people forget. Mahomes actually injured his ankle during the Super Bowl.
Hmm.
Because I think it was TJ Edwards. Yeah, he stepped on Patrick Mahomes' foot, and I think he was already ailing from a like an ankle issue during the playoffs.
Hmm.
And late in that game, what helped seal the deal for the Chiefs was a scrambling ability because like his offensive line, which is really good over the season, it's probably like the best he's ever had. Um, like Ndamukong Suh was about to like get him down, um,
Hmm.
and Isaiah Pacheco was already helping out with rushers. So like he had no help outside of what he could possibly do, and the one who almost got him to the ground was Hassan Reddick, who led the
Hmm.
league with sacks. I think he had like 16 sacks that
Hmm.
in the regular season, and Mahomes not only like outran him, he like got him all the way down to like the Eagles' territory to set up the game winner. Like he like literally flipped the field on a bum ankle, outran like one of the best pass rushers in the league.
Hmm.
Like I think, and it ended up being a 26-yard game, and that was the reason they won. Like you look into like whatever he needs to get done, whoever he has, he finds a way to get it done. I think it's a
Hmm.
credit for his development with Andy Reid, yes, and the fact that he had Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelsey, but at this stage of his career, like Mahomes has already figured it out. Like I think the
Hmm.
one stat I may throw out, just to compare to Brady, Manning, and Rodgers, a lot of people who would say they're one of the greats in the modern NFL. Like, if you look at his average depth to target when not blitz and then when he is blitz, like they're comparable with them. And but he has the highest passer rating against the blitz. So what does that
Hmm.
tell you? That tells you like even now, like he could throw it anywhere he wants, but now he could also make the decisive read against the blitz
Hmm.
and make the right decision every time.
Hmm. Yeah,
So,
he's
yep,
incredible.
no need to show it, but I also have Patrick Mahomes as my number one QB.
Uh-huh.
Um, and to a lot of the stuff you mentioned, anticipatory throws, especially the Kelsey now, is great. Like I mentioned, great
Hmm.
against the blitz. But when you think about that Super Bowl run, I think it's emblematic of what he is as a player, and regardless of the situation.
Hmm.
Um, Great. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of good QBs. I think we failed to mention a couple
Hmm.
that should be pretty important to mention. Um, I know there's one I can mention, but I'll mention them at the end because it's kind of
Hmm.
an out there pick. I don't think people would agree, but
Hmm.
you could make the argument for Aaron Rodgers, despite of his down year. Then you have
Hmm.
Lamar Jackson. Um, I'm gonna go ahead and say Geno Smith. I think Geno
Hmm.
Smith is like a wild card outside candidate that actually had a top 10 quarterback season, borderline top five. If you look at his passing stats. But do you think is there anybody I mentioned? Because I don't want to get flagged in the comments by guys who said, "Oh, how could you forget Dak Prescott or Russell Wilson or Deshaun Watson or people like that?"
um, no, I mean I agree with that. Yeah, Geno Smith, he had a phenomenal year last year. I think again, it's like not I guess the argument to not put him in this top five is I mean just one, the top five are unbelievably talented players, but again, it's like he's in his 30s now, right? And he just had his first good season, and so I guess there's a question mark about can he continue this high level of play? I think he can, at least for a couple seasons, and but obviously there's that big question mark there. But yeah, I think Geno Smith's there. Um, a healthy Tua Tagovailoa could, I think, just be around that number 5 range. I think had he stayed healthy all season and continued what he was doing, he could have been like that number 3 or 4 spot for me. But again, that injury, I feel like knocks him down just because it's like he is inherently injury prone, whether it be different injuries or not. But he has been injured multiple times, and the concussions last season was not super fun to witness for him. And so I think that might be another guy that I could say borders this list, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's a good mention. I probably won't go that route.
Mhm.
Not because of the injury. I wish him all the best. I know like concussions for him especially are like a serious issue where like the
Mhm.
team has to be very careful how they navigate that and how they build
Mhm.
around that because they have a great surrounding cast if he stays healthy and
Mhm.
he's proven like he can function in that offense. Um,
Mhm.
I think the one thing I need to see from him before I solidify that is how does he throw against the grain, against the hash? Because he can
Mhm.
throw deep passes well, like when it's to his same side of the field.
Mhm.
But like on the opposite side of the field, that's
Mhm.
probably like not as strong compared to like the elite quarterbacks of the play.
Mhm.
But again, he could still be a good quarterback and a great one potentially. So I mean, if
Yeah.
that's your one area of concern, and it's not against like the decision making and knowing when to throw it away, when to
Mhm.
check it down, then I don't know what
Mhm.
to tell you, man.
Yeah.
You have perfect expectation. Not everybody's Patrick Mahomes. But
Mhm.
moving on to the running backs, there's a lot of good ones, and we touched upon a little bit on how the running back market is shaping how the running backs might play or not play this season. When I went into this top five, I didn't pay attention to any of that. I was just looking at the running ability
Mhm.
of the backs itself. So that's how I graded my top five. But
Mhm.
what was your mindset when you were looking at your top five running backs?
um, I mean, it's kind of tricky just because a lot of these guys, I mean, they're different, but also just great running backs, you know? And so it's like consistency is like a part of it, but I mean, like we've seen these guys be good for handfuls of years, and um, I think for me, maybe it's like explosive or like extremely dynamic playmaking ability, and I just say that because I mean, you could argue there's like maybe like 20 running backs in the league that can put up relatively similar stats for a team, but it's these top five guys that I think are like game changers and game winners for these teams that, when they're in the game, you can have faith that if these guys are, getting the ball in their hands, that they can lead you to those wins. And that's kind of how I did this because I mean, let's see, there's what, like a bajillion running backs that got over 1,000 rush yards this season, right? You're 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12. There's like 18 running backs, 18, 20-ish running backs or so that, broke that 1,000-yard barrier. And then you have another couple guys that were in like, high 800s, 900s, which is still a pretty good, number to be at, especially with this emergence of running back committees. And so I look at all those and think these guys, there's a lot of guys that can get this high volume, but um, the my top five are the ones that I guess are the ones that win you these games rather than just get you the numbers.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. And I think the amount of running backs that did have over 1,000 yards is an example of what's happening in the league, where like
Mhm.
once they're trying to shut down the deep passing angles, aka playing two safeties deep, that's one less safety in the box. So now you can call like draw plays, like power plays, like gap scheme plays. We could just focus on like blocking up the defense and the linebackers. You don't have to worry about like safeties or nickels like creeping up anymore. So you don't have to run as much zone as previous.
Mhm.
So um, and because not every running back can run zone efficiently. So
Mhm.
when I'm looking at this top five as well, I'm saying, okay, how many of these backs can also just purely run no matter the situation? So
Mhm.
some slight differences. I think
Mhm.
um, we had some differences in our top five just on like how we value the running back position.
Yeah.
But why don't you tell us number five?
My number five guy that I put was Saquon Barkley from the New York Giants. Obviously, I mean he had a great year last season, but then the previous two he did suffer and deal with a lot of injuries. But I think that what makes me really like him is the fact that like when he's on the field and he gets the ball in his hand, like quite literally anything can happen for that Giants offense. And I think that while Daniel Jones did step up quite a lot last season in terms of quarterback play, I think that you could say that Saquon Barkley was the MVP of this Giants offense. And without his like reemergence, I guess, in terms of just showing everybody what he really can do, um, the Giants are nowhere near the playoffs, but yeah, so there's that, and like, I mean, he put up great numbers as a lot of these other running backs that we have up here did as well, and I just again, my metric is just the fact that he can basically steal the show for probably any offense that he goes into. And I mean, like imagine him as he could be a focal point for the Chiefs offense if he was there. Just even with Mahomes and Kelsey there, just because that's how talented of a running back he is. And if it's a horrible snow game or whatever, I could trust Saquon to lead any team to a victory, which is pretty nice. Even if teams are keying in on the run.
Yeah, no, that's a great selection. I think he's
Mhm,
probably one of the most athletic running backs in the league right now,
mhm,
even after like being what 5 6 years into the league.
mhm,
And I I value him as great if you can get him in space. If you get him in
mhm,
space, like he's unstoppable. But I feel like if you can shut down the gaps and you can make him play inside out where he has to focus on interior running, I don't think he's as strong as some of the other backs I had on the list. So
mhm,
I didn't have him at the top five. Um, I've had Jonathan Taylor. I think Jonathan Taylor can do a lot of the things that Saquon Barkley can do in the same situation. And he's already proven like he could be the league leading rusher when he's healthy and when he's had a semblance of blocking around him. So I think last season a lot of people are down on him with the injury and then like the Colts situation on what they were doing. Um,
mhm,
quarterback, like a lot of people had high hopes for the Colts offense because they saw what Jonathan Taylor already did and then what
mhm,
Matt Ryan could potentially bring to the table. But now that you have a rookie in Anthony Richardson, he's going to be leaned on a lot. But if you look at
mhm,
Jonathan Taylor's stats in a down year, even though he didn't eclipse that 1,000 yards that 18 other backs did,
mhm,
he still had 4.5 yards per carry. But on top of that, he had 3 yards per carry after contact
mhm,
in every single season he had. So when I'm looking at that, that's a game changer because
mhm,
now you're not sticking yourselves in like 2nd and 7 and 2nd and 6 situations. He's not the type of back to do that.
mhm,
So when I look at his yards after contact per game, it's 60. Like a lot of backs, they
mhm,
have 60 yards in the game. That's decent.
mhm,
But that's his yards after contact stats. He almost always gets a rushing touchdown per game. Um, and yes, he's had a lot of volume, but
mhm,
if you look at the majority of his volume, like 40 of his carries are when the Colts are within 5 yards of scoring. So he's not just a between the 20s back. He can still convert. I think he converted like 15 of those for touchdowns.
mhm,
So um, I didn't even mention his big playability, which like 13% of his plays have gone for at least 10 yards, and
mhm,
3% have gone over for 20 yards. So you look at these stats and you're saying, okay, he can win from any much anywhere. He can score from
mhm,
like 60 out. He can score from 5 yards out. Um, and I think he has better interior running than Saquon Barkley, which is
mhm,
why I put him at
mhm. Yeah, and I that's 100% valid. Jonathan Taylor, I mean, he had a down year last season, which wasn't even that bad, but literally going into last year, he was consensus the best running back in the league for a lot of people, I think. And yeah, and you just one not as great season, I think made people, I guess, panic about him almost in terms of the fact that he wasn't like a number one or two running back. Kind of, I think, had a lot of people think he's not good anymore. But yeah, I mean, like you said, he was a phenomenal football player, and just a lot of, I guess, unfortunate things happened with the team, and just in terms of his like health and everything that made it hard for him to put up those numbers. But yeah, I think that him and Saquon are pretty interchangeable at that number 5 spot. But going into the number 4 spot for myself, I selected Austin Eckler from the Chargers. um, I think when I think of this guy, I think of a playmaker, like, or just like a football player, where he's an elite rusher and he's an elite receiver, and I think that really separates him from a lot of these guys that put up the numbers, I guess. And it's just the fact that he can literally do anything for an offense that you really ask of him. And I feel like there's not that many running backs in the league that have this dynamic rushing ability. tied to the same, elite receiving ability. And so, I mean, if you look last season, right, he's quite close to, doing that thousand yards for rushing receiving. And I'm like, how often do you see running backs come close to those kinds of numbers? And I mean, on terms of his rushing as well, it's not like he's an inefficient runner by any means. He's running the ball really well. He is what, like last season he had like what 4.5 yards per carry, and each season, despite the volume, and I know less volume is easier to get higher, like better yards per carry, but he is, he's averaged over 4 yards a carry his entire career, which I think is a nice bare minimum to have as a running back throughout your career. And additionally, just because of his play style, I do think that he has a decent amount of longevity still to um, play football in this league, which I like, despite him being like 28 years old or something.
Yeah, I think he can carry a lot of skills into that 30 plus range that people
Hmm.
would think, okay, he's 30, just dump him. But
Hmm.
you're absolutely right about him. And that's why I had him higher on this list.
Hmm.
Because the way he's used is would make like secondary wide receivers like go insane because they're like, I should be getting those targets. I should be
Hmm.
getting those touchdowns. The fact is, Eckler could be used like in zone coverage. Like he's such a cheat code in zone coverage because if they shut down all the outside receivers, you
Hmm.
could just check it down because he knows how to find the soft spots and he knows how to use run after the catch ability in that area.
Hmm.
So I look at his target share, 37%, and I do not blame you why I have him at four. I
Hmm.
have him higher, but at the same time, like at the same point when we introduce these guys, a lot of these guys are like within the same tier. So if you're just
Hmm.
if you're just saying, oh, I have him two, you have him four, you're not as high as him. How could you? It's kind of like you
Hmm.
can't make that argument.
Yeah.
Um, at number four, I had Derrick Henry. Um,
Mm.
he had another down year. In normal cases, he'd probably be like top three, top two on my list, if not one. But all he did in his down year was rush for 1,500 yards, 13 touchdowns, and then earned the second highest rushing grade of his career. And I look at his yards after contact, similar to Jonathan Taylor. It's better, which is why I put him above Jonathan Taylor. It's 3.6 yards after contact per
Mhm.
attempt. So I'm looking at he's another guy that can put you in second, six, and second and five
Mhm.
situations at minimum. And I think for that offense with like Ryan Tannehill and the new DeAndre Hopkins acquisition, Traylon Burks and Chigo Kwanko, you're always going to be in a positive situation where you can call whenever you want because
Mhm.
of the focal point of that offense that is Derrick Henry.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Derrick Henry, he continuously plays good football. I don't even think last year's a down year for him. And I look at the season, I'm like, it's the norm for Derrick Henry. And it's like, I mean, you even look the year before when he got hurt, he was literally on pace for another historic running back season. And I think, I mean, so I have him at my number three spot, and I just think that, like, despite the volume of carries that he literally has shown zero signs of stopping, which I think is insane because for, I think, a normal running back in the league, you see the amount of touches that they're getting, and I think I'd give them like the Dalvin Cook or Ezekiel Elliott treatment of maybe around like 27, 28-ish. Uh, maybe it's about time to not pay them those contracts. But I think Derrick Henry is somewhat similar to Frank Gore in terms of longevity. I think that their style of play, while it is quite physical, they're just built to tank. And um, I think that, I wouldn't be surprised for the next like 4 years or so if Derrick Henry's still putting up, 1,000 yard plus seasons on like with rushing, maintaining pretty good yards per carry. And I think this last season, what I really liked out of him as well was just his receiving ability. I know he's not like a focal point in terms of receiving offense, but he did have career highs in terms of receiving where he got just under 400 receiving yards. And, I mean, you look at that and it's that plus his rushing yards or whatever, that's about just under 2,000 total scrimmage yards, which um, is another incredible season. Because I mean, people talk about like Austin Eckler, who um, has that 900 yards rushing, 700 receiving, who's just around that 2,000 yard range. But Derrick Henry's quite literally in that same category. But I feel like I can trust him slightly more as just like a pure running back, and that's why I had him just above Austin Eckler in this department. But that's how I had it.
Okay. Yeah, and I think at that stage it's like a different set of criteria. I
Hmm.
think for like the next two backs, see for me, I think it's because they're a little bit more versatile. But at the same way, I
Hmm.
think I have one more back who's like Derrick Henry in a way. But I think the difference between him and Derrick Henry is like Derrick Henry has had the volume to support his insane stats, which
Hmm.
that's good on the coaches for utilizing him that way.
Hmm.
But I think the one thing with Derrick Henry, which is why I had him 4 and not higher, is I noticed a tendency like when he's like trapped in the backfield and you catch him before he gets on his insane one way where he can once he goes 5 yards, he's trucking somebody and
Hmm.
going to 20. But if you can catch him like within 1 yard of the line of scrimmage, you can hold him there.
Hmm.
So um, I compared that to like this more elusive back who had 165 slot yards on 18 slot receptions, which means he had 2.7 slot yards per route run, and he's a running back. And changed the entire fortunes of this franchise once he got traded to them, who's notorious for using running backs like recycling bin. No matter no matter how where they are in the draft, no matter what round they're picked, Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers absolutely took on Debo Samuel's role and excelled in it. And I think when you look at his first start where he scored a rushing, receiving, and a
Hmm.
passing touchdown in the same game, and he ended the season by scoring the only score for them in the championship game, he's incredibly valuable for the 49ers. And even in Carolina, when he was putting up historic seasons, you just look at um, how many combined yards he has in that half season stretch, which is 1,509 yards, which is insane to me. And I'm just looking at him and I'm like, what can he not do besides score from inside the five on an interior run? He could
Hmm.
do everything pretty much well. And in this modern NFL, like if you could split him out wide and put him on mismatches against linebackers, it's a cheat code, absolute cheat code.
Hmm. Yeah, Christian McCaffrey's phenomenal. I think people are down on him because of, I guess, past season injuries that kind of, I guess, put him out of the spotlight, which is understandable. Best ability is availability. But yeah, I think we saw last season that he is a good football player still, and he can still put up uh, phenomenal numbers. But um, going on to my number two on this list, I ended up having Nick Chubb here, and um, I know you're a bit higher on him than I am, despite me having him at the number two spot. But I mean, like Nick Chubb is unbelievable. Um, I feel like I don't know. He always just feels like an under the radar running back, despite being like the best running back, quite literally, just because he may not be like I don't know. When I think of him, like he has his big plays, obviously, but like he doesn't feel like a flashy running back, I guess. And so it's like easy to forget about him. But then you look at the tape, you look at just the numbers that he puts up, and he's a monster. Like when he's on like he's quite literally carried the Browns quite hard throughout the duration of his career, despite a fair amount of drama within the team. And so, yeah, I think like you said, like I don't know, he's similar in terms of like just being kind of a more power-ish back, I guess. But I do know that he has pretty good receiving capabilities. He hasn't really been utilized in that manner with the Browns, and I think that's just because of the depth they've had behind him in the past. But I think this upcoming season, we're going to really see Nick Chubb um, have another, I guess, breakout year, just for the fact that I think he can put up a lot bigger numbers with just a little bit more of an empty backfield.
I'm gonna save my love fest for Nick Chubb later. I
Hmm.
absolutely love him as a running back.
Hmm.
You make me want to talk about him for like a 5 minute stretch right now, but I'll hold on to that thought. My number
Hmm.
two is Austin Eckler. You brought up a lot of great points about Austin Eckler. I just
Hmm.
wanted to bring up some few stats to support that. When I was talking about making him being utilized as a wide receiver as well to Christian McCaffrey, like he's targeted on um, like 28 to like 30% of his routes, and then he's scoring like a touchdown 1% of the time.
Hmm.
If you look at how the Chargers finished like 12th as a rushing grade in total, they were 12th, but like Eckler scored 11 touchdowns on 51 attempts and brought up seven more first downs in the red zone. And in that scenario, no back has recorded more missed tackles in the red zone situation. So that's why I have him higher than Christian McCaffrey on this list. But and when you see him utilize like 61% and 73% of his carries inside the five, like he's gonna have like 2 or 3 touchdowns pretty much every game in an ideal situation. So he has a great role, part of a great team. But I brought up the 30% target share against zone coverage. Like he's an absolute cheat code when he's used.
Hmm.
So um, he and Christian McCaffrey, in my opinion, are slightly higher than Henry and Jonathan Taylor because they
Hmm.
can be used in more versatile ways. Um, but as pure runners of the football, they're not up there with Nick Chubb. But
Hmm.
that's not a bad spot to be in when you're being utilized so much in different ways.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, Austin Eckler, he's good. Like I said earlier, I mean, like on like these guys are quite literally interchangeable. I think these are the best of the best running backs I think in the league, despite us having a swap between Saquon and Jonathan Taylor. Like again, I feel like any team would really benefit from having literally any of these guys on here. But for my number one quarterback that I had, or not quarterback, running back that I
Running
had,
back, yeah.
yeah, I had Christian McCaffrey, and um, I think that he just has again insane playmaking ability. I think this is like you hope Austin Eckler can reach the ceiling that Christian McCaffrey has already shown that he's done. And that's why I have him over Austin Eckler. And like you could argue maybe some of the metrics were slightly better or in favor of Austin Eckler last season, but Austin Eckler also did play, I guess, the whole season last year. And so it's kind of hard to do a one-to-one comparison in terms of who did better in certain categories. And I think that I mean, from what we've seen from McCaffrey, he's quite unstoppable. And I think him having a somewhat more loaded backfield, I think, than Eckler, um, kind of almost helps his case. Just the fact that he isn't, I guess, having to wear out his body nearly as quickly. And I mean, I think Eckler plays in a great way as well to not, I guess, expend his body to, have it break down as quickly as some of these other running backs may have. But I think, McCaffrey just is quite literally just a better version of Austin Eckler, at least in my opinion. And I think we've just seen that through consistency. I mean, like he's had injuries, which has been, I guess, my knock on him. And despite his injuries, I still have him number one. But I think that whenever he plays, he puts up unbelievable numbers. And like, I feel like that's the reason why people continuously have drafted Christian McCaffrey as like a first round running back in fantasy football, is just because whenever he's playing football, he quite literally can do like anything, and he puts up quite literally the best numbers I think out of almost anybody on this list that we have.
Yeah, and if you just look at the splits, like with and without Elijah Mitchell again, like his fantasy points are obviously down when Elijah Mitchell like is on the field, but
Hmm.
I look at his route participation like compared to without Elijah Mitchell, it's like 80%. Like he's
Hmm.
participating on passing routes at 80% of the
Hmm.
time. Um, with Elijah Mitchell, he's participating a lowly 76%. So I think about how Christian McCaffrey's used. It doesn't really matter whether Elijah Mitchell or like other
Hmm.
backmates are there for the 49ers. They still know how to utilize him. They're still going to utilize him in the passing game. And he's just an alpha at that. So I don't blame you for having him number one.
Hmm.
Honestly, Eckler and McCaffrey are kind of interchangeable. I would love to have
Hmm.
either if I was building a team and looking for a passing down phenom as well as the running ability. Um, but if I'm just looking for a pure running back, and this is not like a fantasy ranking because if it's like PPR, it'd obviously be different. But I'm just looking for a pure runner who's the best runner in the NFL. I got to go with Nick Chubb. I can't go with anybody else because for his career yards per attempt is 5.2, it's only 3 other people are in that category who are 5.2 and high. Jim Brown, he's a pretty good player, right? Jamal
Mhm.
Charles, and Marion Motley, who also played on the Browns. Nobody else comes close to that 5.2 career yards per attempt. And then that's the highest amongst running backs, obviously, like in this current generation. His rushing yards over expected is the highest of any running back. So he's fully capable of having more rushing yards than what you expect on every snap. And he last year he had a career high 1,525 rushing yards and 13 total touchdowns. And we talked about the passing game involvement and how much potential there is in that. Well, there's already been a significant sign that's going to be better based on previous 3 years because 2020 he had 16 receptions for 150 yards. 2021 he had 20 receptions for 174 yards. And last year he had 27 receptions for 239 yards. So along with being one of the most physically gifted backs, and you could use him in any scenario. Just look at what Kevin Stefanski put out this week about it. He's one of the most physically gifted backs. He forces tackles at one of the highest rates in the NFL, and within the total yards per carry average, being so good because of his rushing ability, you can utilize him on the swing routes, screens, out routes, just like the quick hitting
Mhm.
routes. You don't even have to use him on the same routes that Austin Eckler or Christian McCaffrey are used.
Mhm.
He could still do it from Georgia, but if you just do that and give him the ball, he's going to break a missed tackle and find the
Mhm.
most efficient way.
Yeah, and like I mean I agree with basically everything you said. Like I mean these guys are the top five in the league. Um, yeah, from a pure running standpoint, like I do think that Nick Chubb is probably one of the best. Maybe you could argue Derrick Henry, but I do think that I'd rather have Nick Chubb almost just like a pure running back sense of just being a runner, and I think that yeah, these guys are all interchangeable really based off preference and based off who had the good season last year. I feel like it's really subject to change just because again, I feel like running backs historically just do fall off pretty quickly, and it's not. I mean, not them to blame. It's just the type of workload that they do carry, and so probably next year we'll have somewhat vastly different rankings just with breakout players and guys that maybe fall off from this list. But yeah, I think it's a pretty good list. But in terms of I guess guys that maybe just barely missed out of this list, I have like a few in my head that I got. One being Josh Jacobs. He was the league leading rusher last season, and he had a truly unbelievable, unreal year last year. And I guess one thing on him was just it's his first huge year, and I think that's one reason why maybe I kept him out of this list. And then alongside that, I have like Travis Etienne, Aaron Jones, maybe like Jamal Williams, as other guys that maybe just missed out of the list for me.
Yeah, for me, I obviously didn't have Saquon, but I think Saquon, Josh Jacobs, and Jonathan Taylor are like right there at 5. And I just
Hmm.
had to pick who I thought would be the best one out of the 3.
Hmm.
So I went with Jonathan Taylor. Um, like Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs are close seconds to me. Um,
Hmm.
I look at Ramondre Stevenson. I think he
Hmm.
could potentially break his way on this list with a
Hmm.
couple good seasons and more improvement. I think he definitely has the potential to do that.
Hmm.
Um, Joe Mixon is tough for me to put it on the list. I think he's more of like a top 10 guy than a top 5, like closest to
Hmm.
like the 10 range of it, just because of how he's used now. Like if we're talking about 3 to 4 years ago, he's right up there. He's definitely right up there. And then I have hopes for Najee Harris and Cam Akers. I
Hmm.
do have hopes for Cam, but they're kind of like I'm just like hoping they have good seasons this year where they
Hmm.
can push forward. So like again, a lot of great backs. It's like there's a reason why the market is like so difficult right now to solve for them.
Hmm.
But I agree with you. I feel like 3 years from now or even next year we're gonna have completely different conversations on who's gonna be like the top running backs in this league. Um,
Hmm.
what's very interesting and probably one of my favorite topics for today is to talk about the wide receivers because similar to
Hmm.
the running backs, there's a lot of different wide receivers that can do different things. If you're looking at the slot, flanker, like the X, like who can be utilized like a big body slot as well, and not your typical route running slot. There's a lot of great guys
Hmm.
we could potentially choose from. But when you were considering who your top 5 wide receivers were, what was your rough criteria?
Um, Enough criteria. I mean, feel like just the ability to get open was a huge thing for me. While I do like players that can make contested catches, I feel like that's an inconsistent, I guess, thing to bank on. I mean, we look at Kenny Galladay, for example. He was awful as a route runner, but his whole game was the contested catch. And right before he signed with the Giants, um, people are talking about him as if he was maybe not top five, but like a top 10 receiver in the league. But then uh, when his already weak route running game got weaker through the injury, we really saw that you know getting open is what really makes you a good receiver in the league. And so I think that kind of was a huge metric for this. And then additionally, obviously, the ability to make contested catches, because I mean, the guys that I have on here, while they are elite route runners, they're also just, you know, it's like they have glue on their hands. They can just catch the ball whenever the ball gets their way. And there's a lot of elite receivers as well that I think fall under these metrics that probably got stubbed on this list as well. That like for like that 4 and 5 spot, I was like, there's probably like 5 or 6 players maybe that I was thinking of that could fall into that spot, but it was really tricky because I was like, oh, should I take this guy out? But I'm like, nah, I can't really be taking that guy out. And this guy, I feel like I can't, these guys deserve to be top five, but all these other players are so good too. But I don't know. I feel like this might have been the hardest bit for me, at least in terms of rankings, just because I think that, you know, there are a huge amount of elite receivers plus a huge amount of guys that are on the rise right now that could very well fall into this top five range next season.
Agreed. Yeah, I didn't even go as far as say it's hard, like you said, harder than the running backs. I think there's more depth of talent like that are potential number ones
Hmm.
and are number ones as wide receivers.
Hmm.
With running backs, it's kind of like I had a good idea who my top four was. I just didn't know who that fifth guy
Hmm.
was. But with like wide receivers, I was just like, do I like this order? Do I really think he's
Hmm.
there? What about this guy? What about this guy? And I kept asking myself, why not him?
Hmm.
And I just had to settle on something. So I totally agree with you there. Who's your number five wide receiver?
um, with this, I think it's a hot take despite it being a top five guy, but I had Jamar Chase as my number five receiver.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, and like, I mean, he's put up, great numbers every single season, but I do think that like when I like do a direct comparison to the rest of these guys, it is slightly smaller and like a smaller amount of yards or touchdowns or what not. But I do think that this is partly due to the fact that I mean the rest of his surrounding cast in terms of skill players is unbelievably talented, and so obviously when you're spreading the ball around, it is less on him, but I feel like these other guys also, I mean, just are able to put up just the better numbers. And I think that if I guess you were more of a focal point on the offense, he'd probably have these numbers, and I'd probably rank him a little bit higher on this list. But in terms of, I guess, building a team around a player, I'd say Jamar Chase is easily one or two on this wide receivers list for me. But I just think that, just the amount of yards, I guess, that he's getting, he's just barely broke 1,000. But then you look at T. Higgins on that team who also broke 1,000 yards, and it's like it's hard to see what his true ceiling is right now, just when there is so much talent surrounding him. And so until I see his true ceiling, I don't think I can put him at that number one or farther up on this list.
No, that's a fair assessment. That's a
Hmm.
fair assessment. I looked at these wide receiver rankings a little bit differently. I just looked at the ability and then like what they can
Hmm.
bring on the field,
Hmm.
and like versatility does play a role with it, but also how do they run their routes? So that might affect my rankings in this. But you have absolute credit to put Jamar Chase at five. Again,
Hmm.
there's so many elite wide receivers, so it's not a crime to
Hmm.
have him there. Um,
Hmm.
and I think to defend him a little bit, he did have an injury mid-season
Hmm.
that cost him some runway. So
Yeah.
maybe that kind of speaks to why his yardage is a little bit lower
Hmm.
compared to other guys. But
Yeah.
you could say that about a lot of people, a lot of wide receivers. So again, don't fault you for having him at five. I picked Stephon Diggs out of Buffalo. I think Stephon Diggs had a phenomenal season last year. He's one of the best in the game at route running. Ever since he's arrived at Buffalo, he's been like the top target. Josh Allen has ascended to the NFL quarterback elites because of it.
Hmm.
And I think his receiving grade against single coverage on the outside is um, one of the best in the game. He led the league in touchdowns whenever he's one on one against somebody. And I think with the addition of guys like Kincaid and Shakir, like taking another step, Dawson Knox has always been great. And then Gabriel Davis, like occasionally providing that big play ability. Like all of that is going to help Stephon Diggs not be double teamed as much.
Hmm.
So you're going to continue to see more of the same from
Yeah, yeah. Just Stephon Diggs, he had a literally every time he's on the field, he's phenomenal. He's a great playmaker. I think for me, I think I had him at my number 6 spot. Again, there's so many good receivers in the league that like it was a huge debate in my head between like him, Jamar Chase, and then the guy I have number 4 in terms of who is going to go where, because I just felt weird keeping one of those guys off of this list just because I think that you could say that any of these guys are a top 5 guy, but for my number 4 spot, I did put in Devonte Adams. Um, with Adams, I think last season we saw that. I mean, like he is QB slash scheme proof, and I think that was pretty crazy to see. I mean, like I'm not a huge fan of the coaching. I mean, the Raiders had a pretty awful year last season, and the fact that Devonte Adams still continues to produce, regardless of whose quarterback is. I mean, I like this quarterback too, but regardless of quarterback, regardless of what the scheme might be, is the fact that he's able to be a playmaker and keep his team in games is what led me to put him at this number 4 spot. And because I feel like I don't know, you could put Devonte Adams on even like a worse quarterback team, and I'd still think that he's, putting up 1,400 receiving yards in a year, and I think we see that due to his, route running ability. He's kind of proven himself as an elite route runner, and that coupled with his size, he's able to make, circus catches on the field that are quite hard to make. I look at them and I'm like, glad I'm not him. It's like I'd be fired and cut from a team pretty quick just because I literally don't have the size to even make those plays. But he's quite literally the full package in terms of size, route running ability, hands, and speed. And so I think that all those combined, plus just continuously putting up phenomenal numbers, has me at hit the number 4 spot.
Yeah, a lot of what you said is like I agree, wholeheartedly agree. I think I have him at like 6 or 7,
Hmm.
and the only reason why I don't have him top 5 this season out of all season is just because of the move from Derek Carr to Jimmy Garoppolo. I
Hmm.
think having played with Aaron Rodgers and developing under him for so long, and then going to a quarterback who he's played with in college at Fresno State, and now going to Jimmy G, quarterback he's never played with, I don't know. I hope he's in the top 5 worthy receiver. But I just think the whole Raiders as a as a franchise is going to be dysfunctional. And
Hmm.
despite of that, I still think he's going to hit 1,000 yards at minimum, maybe
Hmm.
1,200 at minimum. Like like I just don't know about Devontae Adams. So
Hmm.
um, I when I was also considering the top 5, I was looking at how scheme proof, but also like what the quarterback situation is. Because if you have the
Hmm.
combination of like this guy's already scheme proof and he has an elite quarterback on top of it, I gotta put him top 5. And that
Hmm.
was kind of my verdict on that. But there's nothing against Devontae Adams.
Hmm.
I think he's an elite receiver, one of the best in
Hmm.
the game at route running. He and Justin Jefferson are the tip of the cap at it.
Hmm.
My number 4 receiver was probably everybody's number 1 receiver a year ago, Cooper Cup. You look at his routes per route run, sorry, yards per route run, not routes per route run. That'd be 1-to-1. But the yards per route run was 2.4. He had a triple crown a season ago, led the league in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. He had another productive season this year before he got hurt. But his yards per route run is something I really want to highlight because it was the second highest of his career. Um, I think it's a testament for Sean McVay for getting the ball to him all the time, and for Matthew Stafford for developing such a rapport with
Hmm.
him. But if you look at Cooper Cup, no matter if he's had Matthew Stafford or Jared Goff, none of which he's had prior
Hmm.
experience with before he first played with them. he's always been a great route runner. I'd always remember when like Steve Smith was like Cooper Cup is the best route runner out of all these guys, and I think he
Hmm.
went undrafted or in one of the late rounds. I never forget that, and I just think he's being slept on after this previous years because
Hmm.
of what he did the last season and what he's capable of producing,
Hmm.
regardless of who's around him.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and with Cooper Cup, I mean, I have him higher up on my list, but I think a big part of his game is just the fact that out of the five guys I have listed, he's probably the least physically gifted player amongst these guys. Yet he's, able to get open all the time. He has, he has sure hands, and so just the fact that I think he's just an incredibly intelligent football player. Like he could probably play quarterback, just with just his football knowledge. And I think that type of player at the receiver position is just like an unbelievable threat to have on your offense. And but I'll kind of go over him a little bit more later when I have him. But for the number 3 spot, I think we both have the same guy here, but we had Tyreek Hill. Um, last season, I think people thought he'd play like he'd have a fall off just because he isn't playing with Mahomes anymore. And I remember everybody was clowning on him for hyping up and talking up Tua Tagovailoa. But as the season began and progressed, it seemed like what he was saying was kind of legit. Just because, I mean, but it wasn't it a career high for him that in terms of receiving yards, and I think that surprised quite literally everybody with how unbelievably talented he was. In addition to that, I mean, you had another elite wide receiver on the opposite side of him in Jalen Waddle that you could say might be taking away targets from him, but he did. I mean, he did get his fair share of yards too. But Tyreek Hill continuously got opened. He is phenomenal after the catch. He's phenomenal before the catch, and um, I think that his explosive playmaking ability had me put him above Devonte Adams, and um, I think that he's one of those guys that I think is just a football player, where he can just do anything on the field, and I think that is what led me to have him at that number 3 spot.
Yeah, I like a lot what you said, and obviously you mentioned we had the same guy.
Hmm.
I think once I got to the top three, I was thinking of like, who do I know out of these five receivers are going to break the game open on any play? And
Hmm.
I look at the top three that I have, and I'm just saying, okay, they can score for 60 at any time. Where I'm looking at Stephon Diggs and Cooper Cup, and I'm like, okay, they can do it once in a while, but not as often as these guys. They're more based
Hmm.
on their route running, which is what I prefer in wide receivers.
Hmm.
But if you have the route running and the game breaking ability, then I got to put you over the top. And starting with Tyreek Hill, a lot of what you mentioned, and this is despite the fact that Tua was hurt for a majority of the season, that
Hmm.
he had his career in receiving yardage. So like his ability after the catch that you mentioned is a perfect fit for this offense and what Mike McDaniel wants to do. And as long as like Hill's on the field, the Dolphins are scoring 35 a game.
Hmm.
I can almost feel confident in saying that because that's just how explosive he is on his own. And then you couple that with Waddle, who could be a wide receiver one on any other team on its own. Like I just think like he's 101. He's 101 as like wide receiver, especially at his stature,
Hmm.
especially as his like we talk about like Cooper Cup and not having athletic ability. Like Tyreek Hill's vertical like catching abilities got like so much better from when he first
Hmm.
started in the league. It's unbelievable. Like a lot of like Tua's insanely accurate, but like sometimes he would throw it where it's like up for grabs. But then you realize, oh, it's like so like Tyreek Hill can time that vertical jump so well that it doesn't even matter if the cornerback is like a
Hmm.
foot taller than him. He's still coming
Hmm.
down with it. And that is just super impressive.
Hmm. Yeah, I wish the Broncos had someone like Tyreek Hill. I wish they had someone like anybody on this list, but like I said earlier, Cooper Cup is my number 2 guy that I put. Um, and like last season, before his injury, he was quite literally on pace to be the best receiver in the league again in terms of just being a stat leader, and I think that's why I have him at this number 2 spot. It would have been cool to see how the season would have went if he remained healthy the whole time. And I think this season will be another, I mean, good season for him. I mean, he was supposed to be ready for the Rams if they were to make the playoffs, and so I don't think that there's going to be too much of like a lull period this upcoming season, barring a preseason type injury. But I think that yeah, he continues to be an elite player, and I think, like I said earlier, he doesn't rely on insane physical like talent and ability um, to put up these great numbers, and that's why I think that he can play for a couple more years. I mean, he's already like I think 30 years old, and so this is kind of around the time that wide receivers start to fall off in terms of playmaking ability. But I think that just because he is such an elite route runner, that while he may not be the number one guy for a handful of years later down the road, but I think he'll be a viable number two, number three guy on offense is being like a 35-year-old player, which I feel like you don't see that too often in the league anymore, where those guys just flat out suck. But he's just a smart guy. He knows how to get open, and I think that's why I have him at my number two spot.
Yeah, and a lot of what you mentioned, he's such a great route runner. I think like a skill like that can take you like even into your like 35s, like
Hmm.
even. So I would not be surprised if he's playing like 5 or 6 more seasons. Like
Hmm.
he has the knowledge just like Kelsey does. Like that's the real
Hmm.
secret. It's not like the athletic ability because like even wide receiver twos and wide receiver threes, they're just as physical and as athletic as some of these guys, but like it's the smarts. It's like the on-field
Hmm.
awareness. It's the football IQ. And to have Cooper Cup at that stage, no arguments there. He's a
Hmm.
phenomenal player. Like he's going at the top of fantasy boards for a reason.
Hmm.
Just because he got hurt last season doesn't mean he's not going to be bad this season. Um, for me, now I have like a pair of wide receivers who people are familiar with. But at number two, I have Justin Jefferson. I do not have him number one. Um, but no shame to him whatsoever. He can play all three wide receiver positions. He's one of the top route runners and ball winners at his game. Like I mentioned, once we get to this top three, I believe all three of these guys can break open a game at any moment in time. Um, when he's been lined up on the outside, he's had 89 for 128 receptions caught out of attempts for 1,140 yards, which is extremely impressive to me because that's just playing from the outside. Like a lot of receivers would be like lucky to have 1,000 yards in the season,
Hmm.
or like be content with having that. But he's like getting that just from playing on the outside, which means he's done a good job of things he's done from LSU, disguising route concepts, varying pace and tempo. He's been reliable like on third and fourth downs. Just look at the Buffalo Bills games. He knows how to adjust in mid-flight and catch balls away from the frame, and that's huge for a guy with his stature.
Hmm.
Um, and they also manufacture touches for him, and as a result, he can gain yards after the catch. And I think another thing that's underrated, he's a willing blocker.
Hmm.
And I think when you see that out of him, what's there not to like about Justin Jefferson?
Hmm. Yeah, I think I have him as my number one guy. He's a phenomenal player. He's played absolutely lights out his entire career, starting as a rookie. And I think, I mean, I know that if he continues this pace, that he'll go down as one of the all-time wide receiver greats in the league. And that's why I have him as my number one guy. I mean, continuing this pace, he's going to easily be like a top five receiving yards all-time guy or whatever by the time he retires. And I feel like just knowing that I'm watching a guy that I know for a fact that could be in that conversation of, the receiver GOAT. I think I just got to put him at my number one spot. I think Chase, he maybe like another year, I think, away from me thinking that if he continues this pace, he's going to be one of those GOATs. But I think that for a fact, I know that Justin Jefferson, he's played great football. He has the ability to make those circus catches. Like you said, he's able to adjust mid route and just mid everything or whatever. But he's
He's not mid.
yeah, well, not mid, but mid doing
Yeah,
anything. He can
there you
do
go.
anything. He's just probably. I mean, he's just really dynamic in terms of the fact that he is an elite route runner, and I think he's up there in terms of route running with the likes of Cooper Cup, but he has that extra, I guess, high gear of physical ability that maybe Cup doesn't have, and that's why I think that he's maybe a peg up of over Cooper Cup. Plus, I mean, him just being a younger player in general, I think that if I had a receiver to build a franchise around, I'd probably choose Justin Jefferson. That even over Jamar Chase. And I think just the one thing with that is, I mean, Jamar Chase, he's putting up great numbers, but he's also playing with his college quarterback. And so you already have the chemistry there. Whereas, Justin Jefferson is playing with Kirk Cousins. And I think Kirk's good, but I think, he doesn't necessarily he didn't start out with that great connection, but he put up like 1,400 yards as a rookie, and he's literally only done better since. And so I think that's why I have um, him as my number one option or number one receiver.
Yeah, you make fantastic arguments. Perfectly reasonable. Perfectly valid. Probably stronger than mine for number one. This is just a favorite of mine. One of my favorite receivers coming out of the draft. I have to put him number one, and I
Hmm.
think he's number one for a good reason. But um, by the time next year, like I probably have Justin Jefferson number one. It's that close between these two as far as like talent. They're both they're both equally as good in a vacuum. But like you mentioned, the chemistry with Joe Burrow is definitely a major thing. I would like to see how Justin Jefferson fares this season now that people know like what he's capable of as a focal point and a schemed option. You still probably put up top five numbers, probably top three as usual, but I
Hmm.
just want to see that as well. When I look at Jamar Chase, great route runner, terrific deep threat, best after the catch. I think that's what most people would say about him. But
Hmm.
I think what's interesting is on the nine in the go route, which is one of his best routes and probably the most simplest ones to guard, he has a 75.3 success rate against man coverage and cleared both 80% success rate against zone and press against that, which is unbelievable because like what he's gonna do. And this is like both years, like that he's been playing, like 2021 and 2022, which is insane to me because like you should know like what he's gonna run and like cut it off, and he's able to win no matter what. And the more physical you play Jamar Chase, actually the better he is. Um, I know just a couple times when Justin Jefferson got stapled a little bit by Jeff Okuda and like a couple of the top wide receivers. So you can get Justin Jefferson at times. I just think Justin Jefferson can win in so many ways that it doesn't matter if you get him once or twice. But Jamar Chase, like I feel like you can't even lock him up at all.
Hmm.
And like because he has so much like release variation at the line of scrimmage that you're gonna lose every time. And then he has great in break transitions. Like he has amazing acceleration and top speed, on top end speed. And I think that's the reason why he'll like beat anybody from 60 yards out, but also like route breaks so effectively. Um, He's also as good in contested catch situations and concentrating on the catch. Like Justin Jefferson, he has in air athleticism, and I think the yards after the catch is why I have him, Jefferson, and Hill all on my top three of receivers because they can break open ball games because of it.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, like all these guys, like we said a bajillion times already, are quite interchangeable in terms of their ranking. Even like the guys that we may have ranked 6, 7, 8 could easily, be our number one guys. Because off the top of my head, you have guys like AJ Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Waddle, as guys who I think were just barely snubbed off of this list. And like if someone were to assume that or think that AJ Brown is the best receiver in the league, I wouldn't hold it against him. I mean, we look at how well he played last year, especially just how great his connection was with Jalen Hurts just straight up off the bat. And the fact that, as time goes on, AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts will just build a stronger connection in terms of that receiving department. And, I just think that he could easily be, a number one this upcoming season. Same with Jalen Waddle, he played phenomenal last season. Like we talked about Tyreek Hill 1,700 yards. Jalen Waddle had 1,300 yards last season. That's also that with while missing Tua Tagovailoa for stints throughout the season as well. And just the fact that this Dolphins offense supported two guys, 1,300 yards, 1,700 yards is quite ridiculous. And the fact that a guy with 1,300 yards is snubbed off of this is kind of crazy.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely wild to me. Like I think he should definitely be taken top 10 among receivers.
Hmm.
If fantasy drafts for sure. I'm gonna throw two guys out there. It's out of left field, but just guys you should watch out for. I think Amari Cooper and Chris Olave are slowly making those top 10 rounds. I wouldn't necessarily put them in like 6 or 7. It'd probably be like you mentioned, AJ Brown, CD Lamb. Like I would put them 6, 7, then probably go Waddle 8. But Olave's quickly coming, and I wouldn't be
Hmm.
surprised he's up the top. And then I know guy coming out of the draft, Marvin Harrison, next season. I'm sure he's going to make his case for top 5 very quickly, if not soon.
Hmm.
But even Garrett Wilson can
Hmm.
can get up there. Keenan Allen might have a resurgence all of a sudden.
Hmm.
There's a lot of guys like DeAndre Hopkins could have a revolutionary season and still
Hmm.
like somehow break this list. He's always been top 5 but
Hmm.
past like 4 years, like maybe like 3 years ago, like before he joined the Cardinals or like that first year when he joined the Cardinals. But
Hmm.
a lot of great names. Let us know who your top 5 is. If you agree, disagree with our list, might be launching out of top 10, might be keeping that top 5. But if you have any differences or comments on who you think should be top 5, let us know and let us know why. Always, as always, follow us on Instagram at mon.mission. You see it in the description in the video. Um, Give a like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you think and what you like to see. Next week, we're going to be covering tight ends, offensive line units, and defensive line units. So, with that, take it easy and enjoy the rest of your day.
Peace out.